Learning is the source of human progress.
It has the power to transform our world, from illness to health, from poverty to prosperity,
from conflict to peace.
It has the power to transform our lives for ourselves, for our families, for our communities.
No matter who we are or where we are, learning empowers us to change and grow and redefine what's possible.
That's why access to the best learning is a right, not a privilege.
And that's why Coursera is here. We partner with the best institutions to bring the best learning to every corner of the world.
So that anyone, anywhere,
has the power to transform their life through learning.
This is Dialogue Television View Mini.
Wow! 60 live TV channels!
Huh? What? It's an endless movie time.
I can talk to my remote.
Yes, go, go, go! The screen just got bigger. Change the way you watch TV with Dialogue Television View Mini, powered by Android TV.
A milk coffee for me?
Money has to be sent to Anna in the morning and the electricity bill has to be paid.
What is today's schedule?
Diafa Uyana 2 p.m. film shooting at 3 p.m.
How's today's weather?
Sunny day, no rain, temperature 27 degrees.
Switch off TV, lights off. You know the account that fits my busy lifestyle? BOC 18 Plus Smart Gen, the smart choice for today's youth.
Greetings from Sri Lanka, ladies and gentlemen. I warmly welcome you to the second day of the 34th Annual Conference of the Asian Association of Open Universities, AAOU 2021. We commence today's proceedings with a keynote address delivered by Dr. Rajiv Jhangiani on the topic, Opening Education Isn't Enough, From Access to Justice. Welcome, Dr. Rajiv Jhangiani. It's my great pleasure to present a brief introduction about Dr. Jhangiani. Dr. Rajiv Jhangiani is the Associate Vice President, Teaching and Learning at the Kwantlen Polytechnic University, KPU, in British Columbia, Canada. Dr. Jhangiani earned his doctorate in political psychology at the University of British Columbia, where his research on the psychological effects of terrorist attacks was recognized with several national awards and the Robert A. Siegel Award from the International Society of Political Psychology. As an instructor, Dr. Jhangiani was recognized for his innovations in teaching and learning with the Robert E. Knox Master Teacher Award from the University of British Columbia and the Dean of Arts Teaching Excellence Award at KPU. In recent years, Dr. Jhangiani has become especially well known for his scholarship on open educational practices, OEP, including as the co-author of 3 open textbooks in psychology and the co-editor of books such as Open, The Philosophy and Practices That Are Revolutionizing Education and Science in 2017, and Open at the Margins, Critical Perspectives on Open Education in 2020. A recipient of the Award of Excellence in Open Education from BC Campus and the Emerging Lead Award from the Open Education Global Organization, Dr. Jhangiani is the architect of Canada's first zero textbook cost degrees and an internationally known advocate for open education, including at the United Nations, where he spoke about open education for sustainable development, and the International Council for Open and Distance Education, ICDE, where he served as an ambassador for the global advocacy of open educational resources, OER. May I kindly invite Dr. Rajiv Jhangiani to present his keynote address. We will be playing a pre-recorded video, and afterwards, Dr. Rajiv is here to respond to any questions that you may ask. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sharanika. Ayobawan. Good morning, everyone. And I wish I could be there in person, but the pre-recording will play now. Thank you. I'm going to join you today for the 34th Annual Conference of the Asian Association of Open Universities. While I would have loved to be in attendance in person, of course, this has been made impossible due to the travel and public health restrictions that are in place due to the current global pandemic. I sincerely hope that you and your loved ones are all safe and well. I'm joining you today from my home in Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada, which is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of the Coast Salish peoples. Today, I want to share some thoughts with you about open education. Open is a philosophy about the way in which people should produce, share, and build on knowledge. Proponents of open education believe that everyone in the world should have access to high-quality educational experiences and resources, and we work to eliminate barriers to this goal, whether these are high monetary costs, outdated or obsolete materials, or even legal mechanisms that prevent or inhibit collaboration among scholars and educators. As representatives of open universities, I'm sure that you understand well the value of open education and why it is essential to provide access to education. Historically, after all, learning was an activity reserved for privileged citizens, the priestly class, the wealthy men. In his book, The Theory of the Leisure Class, Veblen argued that the learned class had therefore long been associated with the aspects of higher education that had no immediate industrial use, such as the study of the classics or music. However, over the last few decades, advances in ICT and open and distance learning in particular have meant that barriers to education are now being removed for a broader swath of humanity than at any time in history. What is more, that all people should have equal access to education is a case that can be made not only on an economic empowerment platform, but also on the basis of responsible citizenship, civic participation, and indeed human rights. The real tragedy of poverty is the loss of every scientific discovery, artistic work, invention, new business, and cultivated mind because of lack of opportunity according to random chance at birth. This is why Article 6 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights includes the following words: everyone has the right to education. Shall be free, at least in the elementary and fundamental stages. And professional education shall be made generally available. Education shall be equally accessible to all on the basis of merit. By the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals explicitly includes a focus on quality education. Having specific targets for the year 2030 helps, as does recognizing the central role that education plays in making progress towards all of the cycle of poverty, progress towards gender equality, responsible consumption and production, and reduced inequalities. But on that note, it is especially important to recognize, as SDG 4 does, that an education that is not inclusive, an education that is not equitable, only serves to reinforce and replicate existing power hierarchies. One incredibly powerful tool that is being effectively deployed across the world right now in service of SDG 4 is, of course, educational resources, or OER. OER are, of course, teaching and learning resources that are published with an open license. These can include textbooks, instructional videos, interactive simulations, lesson plans, and much, much more. Publication with an open license means that the copyright holders are choosing to permit others to freely reuse their work for any purpose, to retain their work forever, and even to redistribute their work to others. They are also choosing to permit others to build on their work, to adapt it for their local context, for example, by translating works into a regional language. The use of OER should really be a core practice for open universities, especially as this enables the cost of education to be significantly reduced. Schwartz wrote in his Guerrilla Open Access Manifesto, "Information is power, but like all power, there are those who want to keep it for themselves. The world's entire scientific and cultural heritage, published over centuries in books and journals, is increasingly being digitized and locked up by a handful of private companies. Those with access to these resources, students, librarians, scientists, you have been given a privilege. You get to feed at this banquet of knowledge," he wrote, "while the rest of the world is locked out. But you need not, indeed morally you cannot keep this privilege for yourselves. You have a duty to share it with the world." At my own institution, Technic University, we actively support the creation, the adaptation, and the adoption of open educational resources. As a result, we now have over 850 courses that have zero required textbook costs. This initiative has saved our students over $6 million in just 3 years. And while that's a big number, what that really means is that individual students have each saved thousands of dollars, and they have not had to try to work for hundreds of hours each year while they are simultaneously attending courses at the university. What is more, when we look at the educational outcomes of the use of OER, we consistently find that students enrolled in these courses show greater persistence and better performance. In other words, the use of OER doesn't just have a positive economic impact, but it has a positive educational impact as well. This is a finding that has been repeatedly replicated in the research literature. And this is even without considering the pedagogical advantages for educators, something that has in fact been well documented at the Open University of Sri Lanka itself. For example, a study published by Shironika Karunanayake and Som Naidu, the integration of OER into the OUSL's Postgraduate Diploma in Education program had a substantial impact on changing teachers' instructional resource use, pedagogical perspectives, and pedagogical practices. The careful and systematic design of activities facilitated a shift from a low to a high degree of innovative use of instructional resources, as well as a creation of OER by the teachers. At the same time, their pedagogical perspectives and their practices shifted towards more constructivist, context-centric, and collaborative patterns, as well as to a participatory and sharing culture in favor of open educational practices, or OEP. Once again, at AAOU, we also work to encourage the use or the adoption of open educational practices by our faculty, for example, by providing workshops and training, as well as through an open pedagogy fellowship program that actually centers on the SDGs. This fellowship was originally developed at Montgomery College in Maryland in the United States, but it has since been now running for 3 years. It now includes the Maricopa Community College system in Arizona, and as of this year, also 2 additional institutions in the province of British Columbia. The faculty in this international, interinstitutional, and multidisciplinary program work together to design course assignments in which students create OER that serve progress towards specific SDGs. One of my favorite assignments in this fellowship addressed food insecurity on our campuses by mapping out food access and creating a public database that identified the edible weeds on our campuses. That assignment was designed by 3 faculty members, one from urban ecosystems, one from sustainable horticulture, and the third from anthropology. It was a creative, meaningful, and a wonderful example of authentic assessment. And this fellowship, I should say, is also a terrific way of illustrating the symbiotic relationship that's possible between OER and OEP. OER invite educators to play a direct role in making higher education more affordable. Right? They invite educators to ask questions about how we can impact access in ways that go beyond the cost of course materials. Access, broadly understood, is seen as fundamental to learning and to teaching. And agency for both faculty and students is seen as an important way of broadening that access. OER, of course, licensed with open licenses, as we know, which reflects not just a commitment to access in terms of the cost of knowledge, but also access in terms of the creation of knowledge. Embedded in the social justice commitment to making education affordable for all students is a related belief that education should not be an elite domain. So knowledge consumption and knowledge creation are not separate, but in fact parallel processes, as knowledge is co-constructed, contextualized, cumulative, iterative, and recursive. In this way, practices invite us to focus on how we can increase access to higher education and also how we can increase access to knowledge, both in its reception and its creation. So, for example, open pedagogy can be understood as an access-oriented commitment to learner-driven education. It's also a process of designing architectures and using tools for learning that enable students to shape the public knowledge commons of which they are a part. This is a vision of education at its finest, as a democratizing tool for empowerment, to support social and economic mobility, and to unlock human potential. And yet, as I point to these lofty possibilities for humanity, I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to reflect on the present context and just how devastating the events have been for so many communities. I know how terrified my own family members are in India, as COVID-19 is ravaging communities in both large cities and small towns, how oxygen and hospital beds are running out and difficult to find even for the most privileged. But beyond the severe impact on health and healthcare, of course, entire sections of the economy are devastated, especially areas like service industry and tourism industry. The job loss in many countries has been much greater, of course, among women and members of minoritized groups and marginalized communities, in some places undoing years of progress towards gender equality. According to the IMF, this unprecedented economic disruption has the potential to leave lasting scars for years to come, arising from persistent declines in the capital stock, employment, and productivity. And of course, education has also been greatly disrupted in countries around the world, whether in the form of children being kept home from school or universities, having to cancel many programs that could not be offered online. According to the World Bank, even before COVID-19 hit, the world was experiencing a learning crisis. 258 million children of primary and secondary school age were out of school, and the learning poverty rate in low and middle income countries was about 53%, meaning that over half of all 10-year-old children could not read and understand a simple text. The pandemic has exacerbated this learning crisis. At the peak of school closures in April of last year, 94% of students, that's 1.6 billion children, were out of school worldwide. And as of January of this year, around 700 million students were still studying from home in a context of huge uncertainty, and with families and schools having to navigate across options of hybrid and remote learning, or in some cases, no schooling at all. There is some concern, of course, from several high-income countries and research over there, which has already revealed some learning losses and increases in inequality. At its peak, 220 million tertiary education students were impacted by closures of campuses globally. The tertiary education system, of course, is critical, as we know, for countries' growth. And while it's too soon to know the full impact on the declines and decreases in enrollment rates due to the pandemic, severe losses of current and potential future students are expected. Unprecedented disruption was also reported for technical and vocational education and training, or TVET. According to a recent survey, 90% of respondents reported that a complete closure of TVET centers in the countries, as the continuity of practical skills training, as well as the assessment and certification of practical skills, was hit particularly hard due to social distancing measures. But even for universities and programs that were able to shift online, the digital divide between learners who have access to computing devices and reliable internet access and those who don't became significantly wider. So if you were a university student over the past year who did not come from a privileged background, the barriers you had to overcome. You had to find a way to pay for your education despite the shrinking availability of jobs. If you were able to find a job, you needed to do everything you could to stay safe and healthy. You may have needed to find a way to purchase technology or internet access at the very time when the demand for such things was rising, and so the costs were rising as well. You needed to study at home, where you may not have the luxury of a quiet study space. It goes on and on. And of course, on the other side, educators were also faced with a situation where they lost a lot of control over how they could teach their courses and their programs, if they could at all. Now, this forced a lot of rapid digital upskilling among many of our educators. And you can certainly look at this as one of the silver linings of the past year. But this process was, of course, stressful for many faculty who are now, a year later, struggling with overwork and, in fact, burnout. Now, as a psychologist, I can tell you that it is natural when one is faced with a loss of control to try and impose control wherever you can, even if this imposition of control is just an illusion. And so it is also unsurprising in my view that just as many educators deliberately sought to provide their stressed students with greater flexibility and more compassion, allowing for example, extensions to deadlines for the submission of assignments or more lenient course withdrawal policies, many others responded to the pandemic instead by attempting to exert greater control over and monitoring of their students. I certainly know that in North America, that absolutely took off was the educational technology industry, especially remote exam proctoring software companies. These companies took advantage of the anxiety of educators by claiming that they could enhance the integrity of online examinations by monitoring the students' bodies and even their eye movements to ensure that they did not cheat. But of course, as with so many tech companies, the sales brochure is a far cry from reality, as there is in fact a growing body of evidence that this technology is often problematic, with issues ranging from discrimination against students who have darker skin tones, who are incorrectly flagged as cheating more often than those with lighter skin tones, to problems associated with not letting students who have disabilities step away from the exam to visit the bathroom, or treating background noise from family members as evidence of cheating. And that is even without considering how easy it is, or how easy it can be, to circumvent this software in the first place. For example, if you're wealthy enough, you can simply own a second laptop or another phone and use that device to look up the information online. And this is what I think an impoverished approach to education can do. It can erect more barriers for learners with fewer means, while creating workarounds that are accessible only to those with greater means. Interestingly, over the past few months, many post-secondary institutions in North America have begun to turn away from this kind of software after having used it for a year. This includes the University of British Columbia, where at their Senate about a month or so ago, they passed a motion that prohibited the use of remote invigilation tools effective immediately. The discussion at the institution cited grave concerns about racial discrimination. Another such case has to do with concerns not about cheating during examinations, but fears about student plagiarism in coursework. And so hundreds of universities are now requiring their students to their essays or their other coursework to software platforms that compare their written text against databases of online articles and previously submitted essays. Interestingly, in doing so, they even require students to hand over their intellectual property to these companies that, of course, actively mine and monetize the students' labor. These choices to use remote proctoring or plagiarism detection software come at a high cost. There's the financial cost to the institutions of the contracts, of course. Then there's the cost to students who have to purchase webcams and other technology. Then there's the cost of implementation, integration, troubleshooting, support. And perhaps most of all, there is the opportunity cost via the lost opportunity to support the design and use of authentic assessments and more supportive and effective learning strategies and environments. I really think that there are many lessons here for all of us from the different ways in which universities have approached the COVID-19 crisis. One of them is this: if you design your learning environments with the most marginalized students in mind, then of course your university will accommodate everyone. Now, this is true in general, but it's been especially salient during the pandemic. It's also true with something like accessibility. So for example, if you provide digital content to your learners and you don't ensure that the images have alt text descriptions that can be read by screen readers for blind students, if your videos do not have captions that can be read by deaf students, and if the color schemes that you use for graphs cannot be distinguished by those who have color blindness, then of course you are subtly ensuring that students with disabilities are being systematically excluded. But of course, if you take these measures, then everybody benefits. And that includes not just students who may have a disability, but learners who, for example, are parents of young children who can then watch the captioned videos while their children are trying to go to sleep. And this is what inclusive design is about. It is similar to the idea of what are called curb cuts or curb ramps on footpaths or sidewalks, as we call them here in Canada. Many countries do not have these, of course, but these things mean that while people who are in wheelchairs find it difficult to navigate the streets safely, when you have curb cuts, it makes it more inclusive. But when you do this, when you install curb cuts, it's not just people in wheelchairs, the target audience who might benefit, it's also others. Whether it's, for example, parents pushing prams or teenagers even on skateboards for that matter. And this is why the concept of justice is so important. As Sasha Constanza Chuck writes, design justice is a framework for analysis of how design distributes the benefits and the burdens between various groups of people. Design justice focuses explicitly on the ways that design either reproduces or challenges the matrix of domination. So the question then becomes, what does inclusive design mean, or what does it look like in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic? One, we know that we now have thousands upon thousands of displaced workers who really rapidly need to either upskill or reskill in order to be able to support themselves and their families. Now, we could choose to lead with fear or mistrust and, in fact, elitism and erect barriers for them, or we could choose to lead with compassion and trust and equity. And we can design our programs inclusively in a way that responds to this urgent societal need and that, in fact, welcomes them into our classrooms. For example, we can provide them with more flexibility in the mode of delivery. We can make our educational content available not just online, but also offline, so that those without access to the internet can still benefit from the opportunity to learn. We can provide flexible pathways to learners, not assuming that they start in the same place or that they progress at the same pace. We can be much more generous when it comes to recognizing prior learning and experience and offer university credit for learners' informal and non-formal learning experiences. And of course, we can adopt and use a lot more open educational resources. But even, frankly, when you're looking at affordability, OER use is not always inclusive. And to help explain why, I will refer to the scholarship of Cheryl Hodgkinson Williams and Henry Trotter. Now, they in turn draw on Nancy Fraser's social justice framework to better understand OER. Fraser endorses the notion that justice is the first virtue, in that it is only by overcoming institutionalized injustice that we can create the ground on which other virtues, both societal and individual, can flourish. And so by extension, Fraser conceives of social justice as parity of participation, as both an outcome, where all the relevant social actors participate as peers in social life, and as a process in which procedural standards are followed in fair and open processes of deliberation. However, both these outcomes and processes can be socially unjust in three ways, and this is what Fraser terms economic maldistribution, cultural misrecognition, and political misframing. Now, where I find this framework most helpful is in distinguishing between responses to injustices that are merely affirmative and those that are truly transformative. For example, on the economic dimension, when you reduce the cost of education by adopting OER in place of, let's say, commercial textbooks, that's a positive, if only ameliorative response. A transformative response would do more to address the root causes of economic inequality. So, for example, providing a stable power supply, adequate access to functioning computing devices, and affordable and stable connectivity in rural environments. On the cultural dimension, one could use OER from the wrong context, as is, and even do harm. Translating OER into local languages would be a step forward as an ameliorative response, but a truly transformative response might include remixing OER critically to engage with and in fact challenge hegemonic perspectives. And on the political dimension, you might look at intellectual property rights. An ameliorative response would be to ensure that educators have the copyright for their own teaching materials, thus allowing them to openly license them and share them publicly. But a transformative response would be to try to alter current intellectual property legislation to allow for educational resources that are properly attributed to be copied and shared without formal permissions or obligatory fees. My colleagues Mahabali and I sought to extend the Hodgkinson-Williams-Trotter framework to broader open educational practices. As you can see, we tried to articulate the different contexts in which, despite the best of intentions, open educational practices may be neutral or even negative, in fact, such as if it is done without student agency or choice to, for example, opt out of public scholarship, if it reproduces hegemonic knowledge, and if students are not appropriately informed or equipped on how to engage in open practice and its risks, such as when marginalized students are targeted and harassed online, for example. Open educational practices can certainly be ameliorative if they address, let's say, economic injustice by producing resources and scholarship that now become accessible to populations who would not otherwise be able to afford access. But practices like this can either be instructor-centered or learner-centered. They can be content-centric or process-centric, and primarily pedagogical or primarily social justice focused. And these are the three lines along which we will see the difference between OEP that are ameliorative and those that are truly transformative. In the latter case, it's often marginalized groups that are involved in the design of the content and processes, and both epistemologies and structural academic gatekeeping may be challenged. Now, all of this interrogation, these kinds of questions are critical in both senses of the word, because if we are to ensure that open education is going to live up to its promise, of course, we need to make sure that we are not just pointing people to the door, but we are welcoming them in. We need to make sure that we are not just working to provide access, but actively fighting for justice. This is why I worked with Mahabali, Catherine Cronin, Laura Chernovich, and Robert DeRosa to curate this collection. It's called Open at the Margins, Critical Perspectives on Open Education. This collection represents a starting point towards curating and centering marginal voices and non-dominant epistemic stances in open education. It includes the work of 43 diverse authors whose perspectives challenge the dominant hegemony. As we noted in the volume, open education is at a critical juncture now. It has moved on from its northern roots and is increasingly being challenged from its own periphery. Now, at the same time, it finds itself marginalized and under threat in an educational sector that's increasingly infiltrated by corporate interests. Open education agendas are not simply being open-washed, as has been observed by many. The concern is that they've become watered down. And it is clear that questions about equity and social justice really need to be reasserted at this time. As I close, I'd like to make a few reminders. For one, remember that open is not enough. When we ignore the digital divide, ignore accessibility, ignore things like data privacy or students' intellectual property rights, these are all glaring reminders that we are perfectly capable of inflicting harm with the very best of intentions. Second, I believe we should aim for equitable access, but then even further for justice. And to use Hodgkinson, Williams, and Trotter's terminology, strive not just for ameliorative responses, but transformative responses to injustice. And finally, although this is a particularly difficult period in human history, I think it is also shedding light on the many cracks that have always existed in the status quo. And in that sense, it is a real opportunity to work together to slowly build a more equitable and a more just world. Arundhati Roy says, another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. I'm very grateful for your attention. I'm grateful to the program committee for inviting me to, and I thank you very much. I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rajiv Jhangiani. for a very informative, insightful, and an interesting presentation. May I kindly invite the audience to raise any questions or post any comments on the chat. Meanwhile, since Dr. Rajiv is here, he can respond to any comments, and we have a few minutes left, so please do that. Rajiv, would you like to add anything?
Yes, please. Thank you. And first of all, I should say it's such a pleasure to see you again, Sharanika. I'm glad that our two universities continue to collaborate on different projects, and I want to acknowledge your recent participation in our Open Education Research Institute at KPU. But also, I just want to take a moment to thank Vice Chancellor Arya Durai and the other members of the organizing committee. I really look forward to the day when I can return to your beautiful shores. But I will be monitoring the chat as well. So if I see any questions over there, I'll be able to read them out and respond to them. But I'd be very happy to take any questions, or even if you have any comments or reflections to share.
Thank you, Rajiv. So participants, please post any questions. I think there's one question already there, Rajiv.
Yes, thank you. And I'm just going to read it out for accessibility. The question is, are there materials available for authentic assessments, or have marginalized groups been given opportunities for the co-creation of materials? It's a really good question. I'll try to take them in turn. When it comes to authentic assessments, I think this has been, again, another one of these silver linings where over the past year, a lot more people have discovered suddenly that there's a different way to assess learning than simply high stakes final examinations, and so the added advantage, of course, being that it's more realistic in terms of if you're trying to inculcate skill development among your students, to generate a kind of assessment method that is reminiscent of the environment that they will be in once they graduate, right? So a more real world context, which is more authentic in that sense, but it's also more authentic in terms of the motivation for students. I think one of the great things we consistently see is when learners know going in that what they're working on in terms of coursework, if it's just an essay that will be seen by the instructor, the level of motivation and engagement is at a certain level. And of course, there's a continuum there. But when they know that it is actually something that they see the value, they see the purpose, they see the connection to where they're trying to go, they pour a lot more energy and in fact take a lot more pride into it. I will say, yeah, there are a number of resources to help with this. And when it comes to open educational practices and authentic assessment in particular, I'll point you to one place to start at least. And I'm going to try to put the link in the chat once again. And sorry, I'm doing this in two different places because there's the Zoom chat and there's the YouTube chat, and I'm going to do it in both places. But I'm putting a link to a place called the Open Pedagogy Notebook. And this is an example of a place where people, educators from across the world, have been sharing their examples of what their authentic assessments that use open practices look like. And so you'll be able to see lots of ideas over there, certainly. But I would say in some ways, moving towards authentic assessments doesn't have to be a radical shift. You don't have to, burn your assignments to the ground and start from scratch. It's often just small tweaks, small adjustments. And I think part of this is partnering with students. In fact, I think one of the most productive uses of authentic assessments is not to try even to create something that a third party would want to use. For example, in terms of marketing students creating a brochure for a not-for-profit organization. But in fact, where the students really have expertise is in being students. And so I know I have a lot of colleagues who are working with their students through authentic assessments for them to create guides and reflections and annotate readings and so on that future cohorts of students taking the same program of study will benefit from, right? So if you've already broken a path in an unwieldy forest effectively, by leaving those breadcrumbs, you're doing a service to the learners who will follow. And so I think that's a very easy to access form of authentic assessments. And I think
yes, from Menaka about proctoring measures. We can take only that. We have 5 minutes.
Sure. Yes, thank you. And I think the question about not going for proctoring measures, well, I think there's different ways to do this. I would say I always encourage people to reflect on, as instructors, we have certain anxieties and then we engage in certain practices. But if our responses are responses that heighten the student's anxiety, it's not necessarily helpful. I would say, There's a great push towards the use of e-portfolios, as we often call them now, to reflect not just the products of learning, but the process of learning and the self-reflection and the peer assessment as different components of learning over here. But the design of assignments where students are able to, for example, develop and model their or showcase their skill development in a way that's not just high stakes, but that represents more honestly the learning process is part of this. So I will try to provide more links to you. But just to give you a small illustration over here, I have a friend who's a teacher at the University of Toronto. His introductory psychology classes have 1,500 students in them. And I'm saying this because you're saying you've got about 1,000 students. And one example of authentic assessments that he does is they work together to edit, improve, augment, refine, or even write new articles on psychology topics in Wikipedia in partnership with the Wiki Education Foundation. It's very easy to track the students' work. It's very easy to embed peer review. But of course, the students will get very excited at the notion that they are in fact contributing to the public body of knowledge. And he does that very successfully with well over 1,000 students, in fact. So I think you'll see some examples on the Open Pedagogy Notebook. The Wiki Education Foundation is another source of examples, and I will try to add a couple more links in the chat as well. But I hope that gives you a starting point. I will only end by saying that, I think in asking this question, the good news is you're not the only educator asking this question at this point. And there is a global community that's focusing on how to implement and scale authentic assessments. So I would encourage you to reach out and speak with colleagues because it's likely some of your colleagues have been struggling with the same question and they may have discovered an answer or two.
Okay, thank you, Rajiv. So we are extremely grateful to you for sharing those insightful thoughts on opening education isn't enough from access to justice. And I also like to thank the audience for attending and asking questions and making comments. And I also wish to remind you that Dr. Rajiv Jhangiani will be conducting a separate workshop tomorrow at 10 a.m. on designing renewable assignments, integrating learner-created content into ODL courses. So I think all those questions will be answered in detail during that workshop. So I invite you to join in that session as well. So thank you very much, everybody. So can we just take a group photograph of everybody just switching on? Is it possible? The session host, can we just allow everybody to switch on their videos just for a moment?
Oh, this is a lovely idea. So nice to see everyone.
Yes. Because of the connectivity issues, we keep everything switched off, but at least for the photograph. Can we ask the participants to switch on their videos just for a moment so that we can capture? Okay. Okay, I think, yeah, I think some of them have not switched on anyway. Thank you very much once again, everybody. So we'll end this session now because in few minutes, the other session begins, I think at 10 a.m. And finally, once again, I thank Dr. Rajiv Jhangiani and wish all the audience for a very productive day today as well as you enjoyed yesterday. I hope you will also enjoy all the events scheduled for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone.
I believe the same link would be there for the next session. Can somebody inform about that? I think Dr. Ajit Madhura Peruma, the Deputy Vice Chancellor, will be taking over the next session. So I think you can be in the same link until he takes over.
please be in the same link. We'll be starting the Coursera presentation in short while.
Hello, good morning. Can we start?
Yes, sir, we can.
Okay. Now what we are having is we are having a presentation by Coursera. Coursera, as you know, is one of the world's, not one of the world's leading course provider, MOOC provider, massive online open courseware. And the Open University has formed a partnership with Coursera to offer their courses to our students. And we have had very successful meetings with Coursera. And Coursera is a principal sponsor of this conference as well. And today we have Mr. Raghav Gupta, the Managing Director for India and Asia Pacific region. Mr. Gupta is leading the Coursera in India and Asia Pacific region. And he's the person who is responsible for growing Coursera's consumer and enterprise business in the region. And that means that he is the one who is responsible for bringing world's best education to learners in the Asia Pacific. And he's also the global lead for Coursera for Campus. That is a platform for universities and colleges, which we are also a partner. And he has 22 years of experience across consumer, internet, and management consulting industries in India, Southeast Asia, and Europe. Previously, he was the India country manager at BlaBlaCar, an intercity carpooling service. And he also has experience of more than 15 years as a management consultant. And he led the retail services of Booz & Company in India. And he served as the president of Technopark Advisors. Raghav holds an MBA from INSEAD in France, and he did his post-graduation in fashion business management from the National Institute of Fashion Technology in New Delhi, and BTech in mechanical engineering from Pune University. Now we have a presentation from Raghav, and after that we will have a very brief question and answer session. Over to you, Raghav.
Thank you so much for that introduction. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today with all of you. I'm going to be talking about reimagining higher education, especially 2021 and beyond. And I think it's safe to say that with everything that's happening around us with COVID, I think this is absolutely the right time for us to be thinking about reimagining higher education. I'll focus on sharing some of our work and what we're learning from around it and what that might mean for some of the leading open universities in the region. Now, to begin with, I'd like to share a little bit about the kind of challenges that we're expecting graduates and students coming out of open universities will face. We think about this as double disruption. All of us know that automation in the workplace was already happening pre-COVID, and COVID has accelerated that disruption, which is why double disruption. And there are possibly four main elements to this double disruption. Industry is telling us that many jobs will get displaced. This is statistics coming from the World Economic Forum, and as many as 85 million jobs around the world are likely to get displaced in the next 4 years or so. Also, research from the World Economic Forum is telling us that the kind of skills that working professionals will need in the next 3-4 years are likely to change quite dramatically, and which is what we see here, that 40% of skills might change in the future. Many companies, including my own, intend that even post-COVID, much high percentages of workforce will continue to operate remotely, and that has implications as well. And then almost every business around the world, upwards of 90%, businesses are accelerating digital transformation. And what this means for graduates is that there will possibly be lesser jobs. These jobs will require more different skills. There will be skills that are needed in terms of working from home, and there will definitely be skills around digital that an individual will need to learn, irrespective of the kind of job that they might want to pursue. We're also finding, and data is supporting a lot of this, that definitely, and this is emphasizing the point that I was making on the previous slide, that a lot of emerging job opportunities that are coming up will require digital skills. On the left, you'll see on this chart what are some of the top 10 jobs that are coming up. This is again coming from the World Economic Forum study. And whether it is data analysts or big data specialists, or going further down, digital transformation specialists, these jobs will require a combination of digital and data skills. And as I said on the previous slide, there will be job losses, but there are also expected to be new jobs that are expected to be created. And what we have here on this chart is data coming from Microsoft research, which says that as many as 149 million jobs that will get created out of a total of 190 million jobs will be in the digital space. And you'll see a large numbers when it comes to cybersecurity, data analysis, cloud, software development, and so on. So, that's some of the industry level trends that we're seeing, and these definitely have an implication for us in the higher education space. Before I jump into that, I'd love to set a little bit of context and also introduce Coursera. And this is the data and the insight that I'll be sharing through the rest of this presentation as we move forward as well. Now, Coursera is a global learning ecosystem. There are three pillars to this ecosystem: learners, educators, and institutions. There are a very large number of learners on our platform, upwards of 80 million individuals globally. And these individuals come to our platform because they want to learn, but also importantly, they want to prosper. They want to get ahead in their careers. They want to transform their lives. The content that learners and also institutions take on our platform comes from 160 of the top universities around the world, the likes of Stanford and Michigan and Imperial College and IIM Calcutta and many others, and also industry partners, leading companies, likes of Google and IBM and Facebook, who create content on our platform. And educators want to reach the world via the Coursera platform. So they want to reach out to 2 million learners. And then they also want to reach out to institutions. And as a part of our work with institutions, we work with businesses, governments, and campuses, and close to 6,000 of them. And Coursera is the platform that then supports this overall ecosystem. And as I said, most of what I would be sharing today is going to come from our learnings by working with these stakeholders on our platform. Now, one of the interesting things that I thought would be helpful to share is how learning on the Coursera platform is changing. And there's a lot of information on this slide, so let me break it down. We looked at what are the top 10 skills that employed learners around the world are learning on the Coursera platform in 2019, and then how that shifted in 2020. And you'll see a lot of the skills in 2019 were very technology specific and very functional skills. So Python programming, neural networks, and so on, deep learning and cloud computing and so on. And then there was some business, so the strategy course, and some communication, so writing. But in 2020, with the pandemic hitting all of us, we saw significantly that changing. And so writing, mindfulness, meditation, gratitude, many of these were skills that people around the world spend time learning. And so what would be counted as a lot of digital skills shifted to, I would say, a lot of human skills in 2020. And then we look towards the World Economic Forum to look at some projections on what the future might look like in terms of the essential skills of the future. And we see that this is a combination of skills around analytical thinking, problem solving, but also technology use, technology design, and so on and so forth. Which brings me to the headline that we see on this slide, that the essential skills of the future are a combination of digital and human. And in my previous slides as well, I spoke about how a lot of emerging jobs are in the digital and data space. And then this slide emphasizes the human skills that we need to be thinking about as we think about future graduates and the workforce of the future. Now, we have seen over the last year or so that many students, upwards of 76% of all students around the world were taught in some kind of online learning or the other. And that's a very significant number. But the experience of online learning has not been very consistent, and there are various challenges that remain. And we've highlighted 3 of these. Firstly, the digital divide. There are students with access to devices and some who are not. But even more than that, if students have access to either a laptop or a tablet or a mobile device, the connectivity to the internet has been inconvenient. And so if a faculty member is conducting a live class on a platform like Zoom or Teams, if a student is unable to connect and they need high bandwidth, that has been a challenge. Second, many faculty members have found that student engagement has been poor. To be attending a 1-hour lecture online for faculty members at times not to be able to see the students is hard, and for the students to also pay attention in a 1-hour virtual class has also been hard as well. And then lastly, the gap in faculty capabilities on teaching online has also been quite wide. All of us have found that teaching in a class is quite different from teaching online, and sometimes good faculty members who are very good at teaching in a class have struggled with being able to teach online very well as well. And so I'll talk to you a little bit about how we are working as Coursera on solving some of these challenges as well. But safe to say that significant challenges have come forward as we've seen high adoption of online education over last year. We've also found that open universities around the world and in the region, specifically face many challenges. These are possibly the 5 most significant ones of these. On the top left, student employability. I cannot emphasize this point enough. With the changes in the kind of skills industry needs, with the reduction in the number of jobs available and growth in jobs in the digital and data domain, student employability, which is equipping students for jobs of the future, is going to be quite important. Second, many open universities have been asked about being more flexible in the kind of learning that they're able to provide. So more modular curriculum, more multiple entry and exit points, and how do open universities enable that? Thirdly, I would say the challenge which has always been there for many open universities is the brand. There's been at times a perception of poorer quality. And I think the pandemic actually provides an opportunity to improve some of the brand value by being able to deliver high quality online education that might come from open universities. So I think it's been a challenge in the past. I think it presents opportunities as well. Capacity, of course, to be able to continue to serve students at high capacity, but at very efficient costs, I think continues to be an important challenge. And I would dare say that online education has a big role to play, given just the cost efficiencies of online education here. And then lastly, I've spoken about this earlier as well, which is faculty development. How do you get faculty development to happen at scale so that the kind of jobs of the future that students need to be getting geared for, faculty are then able to work with them towards those jobs of the future. Now, in our experience with working with universities around the world, and I would say this is with open universities and also universities with students on campus, we've had a lot of experience over the last 1 year. Coursera works with close to 4,000 universities around the world, and some of the outcomes that we've been able to deliver have been highlighted here on the left. As a result of bringing high quality learning from some of the top universities and companies around the world, universities have been able to adapt and include Coursera to complement what they're teaching as a part of their university. In some cases, towards the extent of 10, 20, 30% of credits that are granted as well. And they have been able to deliver stronger student job outcomes. Secondly, once a university is able to deliver stronger student outcomes, the attractiveness for new students goes up. And so the cost of acquisition, the cost of marketing to new students come down. Thirdly, because some of the learning has moved onto a platform like Coursera, faculty time is saved up to either mentor students, to provide them guidance, to possibly use in research and development, and to also use in executive education. So faculty time has been deployed in more productive tasks. Fourthly, some universities are working with us to design flexible and stackable degrees, and I'll talk about this in just a bit. And then lastly, the point I spoke about earlier as well, which is faculty and staff. Many universities that we partner with are using Coursera content to develop their faculty on cutting edge skills and investing in their ongoing education as well. Whenever this is a paid exercise, of course, it's important to calculate a return on investment on this exercise as well. And I won't get into the figures on the right, but we've done various studies which tell us that this is a fairly high return investment from a financial standpoint as well. Now, with this context, I'd like to introduce this platform, which we call Coursera for Campus. And I would imagine this is relevant for many of the audience who are joining us today. And this is the platform that has delivered some of the results that I shared on the previous slide. And this is a platform that enables campuses to stay ahead in this new world that we find ourselves in. There are 5 elements to this. I'll quickly talk through all 5 of these. Firstly, there is content. This comes from the 150 universities, 50 companies who author content on our platform. And this is the first piece which is available. Second, in today's world, I believe almost every faculty member needs to be authoring online content. And so we are providing our tools and our technology and our training to faculty members with universities that we work with to enable them to author content. And once this content is authored, it can be privately made available to their students and to their ecosystems. The content could be short assessments, it could be full courses as well, gradually. Thirdly, again, in today's world, all of us as working professionals use a lot of tools, software tools, and so on and so forth. And so we've launched something called guided projects, which enables hands-on learning. This could definitely be applied to students who are studying technology, computer science, electronics, and so on. But even to management students, students in other disciplines, if they need to learn software tools as a part of getting ready for workforce of the future, we've seen very strong applications and adoptions of hands-on learning. Fourthly, job-ready skills. As I highlighted earlier, we work with upwards of 2,000 businesses around the world, and we have a strong understanding of what are the skills of the future that they're looking for. And so we are able to bring skill sets and skill development dashboards to provide guidance on what curricula might look like to be able to adapt that to the future of work. And then lastly, to be able to deliver this learning on a scalable platform is extremely important. And I spoke about the digital divide as well. We've built technology that can actually be delivering learning with low bandwidth connectivity. There's also ability to deliver a lot of learning in offline mode, download online and then view offline as well. And this together is the 5 elements that make up Coursera for Campus. A key element in all of this is our approach to content. And this is something that we informally call the house of content slide at Coursera. And what you'll see here is the way we've approached working with campuses and universities is to say, firstly, we can bring content which is core to the curriculum of what the discipline a student might be learning. So there might be content related to business or science and technology, humanities, social science, and others. We can come in and complement what students are learning as a part of a university. Secondly, something which really differentiates a lot of the content on Coursera is to bring emerging technology. So students might need to learn, machine learning or artificial intelligence, or a management student might need to learn blockchain or fintech. And so a lot of that content is available via the Coursera platform. Next, multidisciplinary learning. In today's world, increasingly regulation in countries like India is encouraging students to be more multidisciplinary and to be able to bring liberal arts content to an engineering student, or to be able to bring business content to a healthcare student, so that multidisciplinarity is made available via the Coursera platform. And then career skills, just getting ready for interviews, how do you work in teams, leadership skills, and so on and so forth. Now, all of these are relevant for students. They're also relevant for faculty. And then specifically for faculty, you see at the bottom, the application of this content to enable to faculty to upskill, either in the ability to provide digital teaching or even in the content domains that are listed out on the slide. all of this can manifest in itself into a fairly powerful career-oriented curriculum. And this is an example of what a bachelor's in computer science with artificial intelligence specialization can look like. In some of our work, what you see on the left is example of some of the semesters that the student might be studying. And there are core subjects and also emerging technology subjects. And in this example, what we've done is, as a part of core subjects, there are certain content pieces that have come in from Coursera and complemented what the student is learning. So in this particular case, in semester 1, there's a course called Introduction to Electronics, which has been embedded from the Coursera platform, which is coming from Georgia Tech. And then as a part of emerging career path in artificial intelligence, this student is learning Introduction to AI, which is authored by IBM. And then if I look further down, in semester 5, there's an example of a course from Duke University in Java, which has been embedded into this program. And there's also Introduction to Deep Learning coming from University of Michigan. So possibly 60–80% of the content come from the university. And anywhere between 20, 40, even 50% of the content coming in from Coursera to complement the specialization, which in this particular example is the artificial intelligence specialization. And this is what it might look like. The other piece which I spoke about as challenges for open universities is the ability to offer stackable degrees, because students today are looking for multiple entry and exit points. Not everybody necessarily is looking to do a 3-year degree or a 4-year degree, but they might want to come in, do a 3-year diploma, go and work for some time, and then possibly also want to come and complete that degree and then get that certificate as well. And so the ability to build degrees that are flexible, that are also adaptive, because traditionally all of us know that the ability to update curricula has been traditionally slow with a lot of higher education institutions. But because you're able to assemble content from not just one institution, which is your own institution, but also the 200 institutions that author content on our platform, that provides for adaptive capability. I spoke a lot about how this is skills based, because this is oriented towards a lot of jobs of the future. And then finally, digitally focused as well. Just building literacy or advanced level skills in digital technologies is critical as well. And that's some of what we've been enabling with institutions that we've had the opportunity to partner with. The way this can manifest itself, and I'd love to share an example, and this is a slightly busy slide, so please excuse that. But if you were to look at a management student, an MBA student, this is what it might look like. He or she might come in and take a social media marketing certification. In this example, it's authored by Facebook, and they may then exit this program as a social media analyst after just receiving a certificate and receiving education for 6 to 8 months. The student could then continue their education if they were to choose, and further take a digital marketing specialization, in this example, coming from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And if they were to then exit this program, they would receive a diploma, and then the kind of career that they would target as a starting point might be that of a digital marketing associate. Or this student could continue on, complete their full degree by spending another 9–11 months with the institution, take a host of topics, strategic planning, finance for managers, leadership, and so on and so forth, and then exit with a full degree and thereby becoming a digital strategist. And what you'll see again on this slightly busy slide is a combination of courses, projects, which I spoke about, guided projects, and then also specifically digital skills given just the nature of the job. And so what this example kind of illustrates is the ability to offer multiple entry and exit points. It also offers examples around job role-based pathways, so the social media analyst or the digital strategist as example. Yes, I spoke about hands-on learning already, and then the digital focus, which I think a lot of our career education will need going forward as well. Lastly, and this is absolutely my last slide, I wanted to take an example and share some of what we're doing with the Open University of Sri Lanka, or USL. And as many of you know, this is the National Public University of Sri Lanka with upwards of 40,000 students. Last year, the leadership at the university reached out to us. So the Vice Chancellor, Professor Samuel, and the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Professor Rajiv, reached out to us, and they said to us that, the government of Sri Lanka has set out a goal to build highly skilled graduates for the ICT industry. And the directive from the Ministry of Education and the UGC in the country has been to increase the number of students in these industries, specifically for IT and software engineering programs. So Coursera and OUSL partnered up with the intent of bringing high quality, learning in the topics of software development, of information technology. And the new programs that OUSL have launched will have anywhere between 30 to 50% of the credits coming from content from the Coursera platform. And there's going to be courses, there's also going to be guided projects so that we can provide a combination of high quality knowledge and guided projects. And then students will receive the degree from the Open University of Sri Lanka, and would also, when they take courses on the Coursera platform, would receive certificates from each of the authoring universities. So, whether it be Michigan or Imperial College or IIT or any of these institutions. And I think this is one of our firsts as a program in terms of partnering with an open university. And, really thankful to the leadership of both Professor Samuel and Professor Ajit, and thank you so much for your partnership. This is an exciting and a really visionary program that we are participating in, and we're happy to support you with this. I hope some of this has been useful. I'll pause with that. My email is on this slide as well. If anybody would want to reach out, get into a deeper conversation on some of the trends that we are seeing, how this is shaping the future of higher education, and what might be partnership opportunities for us to discuss, would really be happy to engage in that. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you again for inviting me here today. All right, thank you for listening in. Professor Ajit, if we have time for a few questions, I'm happy to take those live or in the chat as well. Either way would work.
Hello.
There seems to be some echo happening.
Thank you very much, Raghav, for that wonderful presentation, and I'm very happy that we formed our partnership. We have a few minutes. If anybody from the audience wants to take a question, clarification from Raghav. Please disable. Yeah, you can type it in the chat box if you have a question to Raghav. Okay, if there are no questions, Raghav, thank you very much. And we are, as I said, we are very glad that we formed this partnership and we are moving forward, especially in this.
Professor Ajit, I see a question in the chat from Mr. Kamran. Maybe I could take that before we wrap up.
Yeah, there's a question, Raghav, whether Kamran from Pakistan, AAOU Pakistan is asking whether they can integrate Coursera with existing LMS, for example, Moodle.
Yeah, so the answer is yes. We do integrate with a number of LMSs. With many of them, we have off-the-shelf, ready to integrate APIs that are already built, and we can do it fairly quickly. And in some cases, we might need to do some custom work where the integration can be done as well. So depending on, whether it's Moodle, whether it is somebody else, we are usually, I would say, able to integrate with the LMS so that we can make the information flow be quite seamless.
Great. Any more questions? No. Okay. So Raghav, thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. And the more we interact with Coursera persons, we find that we are a very good match. The points that you talked about, you know, the flexibility, the adaptiveness, and 21st century skills, all these, you know, are in our vision as well. So we are a very good match, and thank you very much for that presentation. We hope to continue this partnership, though we have, I mean, like we have challenges, you know, with this pandemic, you know, the country getting closed down. We haven't been able to, you know, we had plans, you know, we made very meticulous plans, but all that has gone now haywire because of the pandemic. But we expect that we will partnership as soon as the things get back to normal. So thank you very much, Raghav, and thank you very much for all the participants for that wonderful presentation.
Absolutely, Professor Rajiv. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for your partnership, and looking forward to progressing this.
So that concludes the session. Now, somebody's taking one.
Okay, thank you very much, Raghav Gupta. Yeah. So with that, we will close the morning session, and we will move on to the parallel session now. Thank you very much, and thank you very much to all the participants.